So I realized that I have to clarify something or slash add something to the explanation of how we heal. When I said that we have to go through the core or melt our way, make our way bit by bit, always to the core of the trauma or of the fear or of the, that's the, here I'm talking in big volume when I'm talking of trauma. And every trauma on top of it grows out of the core belief in separation and in the possibility of fear. That's the baseline, the base tone of where trauma, actually that trauma creates. But when the potential for that wouldn't be there, the potential is already there when we have a body. And when we have a body in the third dimension. Because the third dimension is a time-space vantage point of also within when we get born into the physical body, there's also the noosphere, there's the field, the collective field of consciousness that we are born into at that certain time, and that we get imprinted with, of course, through the way that we get imprinted, the way that we see the imprint has then to do also with our astrological imprint. But what I wanted to say is, remember when I said you hold, okay, wait. First I said, this is the big volume. The small volume is how we meet negative thoughts. That's the small volume, is just simply having a negative belief. And, a negative belief that has maybe a smaller impact. But then when we go deeper and deeper down the branches and down the trunk of the tree, it gets emotionally bigger and bigger. So I was explaining it in the big way, when a big negative emotion gets triggered and we're standing in the middle of it, in this fear, either a situation or a direct attack, verbal attack, or it feels like an attack, verbally being attacked, being made the victim, feeling the victim, and also standing in somebody else's rage and anger, something like that. And then when that gets re-triggered, to be able to feel our reaction, negative emotional reaction to that, and stay conscious. So without the full identification of fully going into the story of victim and feeling really terrible about what's happening. And the way I was describing it is, I am victim here, or poor person, horrible person, or I'm the victim and they're the perpetrator, or I'm the horrible person, they're the victim, I'm the perpetrator, and they're the victim. And what I didn't mention, which is key, which is absolute key, and there's always these layers on top of layers, and sometimes I don't get it all at once. That is, okay, it's not that when we revisit and get re-triggered and are able to, and we feel these negative emotions, we stand in our negative emotions. It's not that we see it from the perspective that we were not victims. When it happened, we did feel victimized. It's not coming to the perspective that we were never victimized, although that perspective eventually, that is there too. But we can only get, here's the key, we can only eventually get, and that's the full healing, to the perspective that we were never victimized truly, when the perspective that we were victimized, and every single pain that happened, every single emotion, negative emotion that happened, fully to the full depth of that pain, when we completely feel our victimization. And so only when we so to speak own our victimhood, own our victimization, own the horrors, whether it was that we were a victim or that we did something bad, that something bad, terrible was done to us, or that we did something terrible to another. Only when that is fully owned and gained and felt, all that sadness, all that pain, all that anger, the full justification of it. First it has to be fully like harvested, felt. And that is a truth. That is a truth. So yes, I was a victim. That has to be seen, truly seen, before we can go beyond it. That's the going through it to go beyond it. And so going beyond it and coming out on the other side and seeing the full perspective, that coming from the higher perspective of our souls, from the awakened perspective of who we truly are, not from the illusory asleep perspective. When we come from the awakened perspective, the soul is not a victim. The soul doesn't get victimized. The soul doesn't see itself as a victim. But we can only get to that perspective when we first wake up fully to that we were victimized and to our victim, and really feel that. And we feel sorry for ourselves. Whatever is there, we feel. And that's the only way we can get to the higher perspective. Which it may seem like it's a paradox. That's why, that's why the understanding really helps. The understanding really helps. For the mind, it seems to be a paradox, but when we see it, when we see our life from this understanding, from the greater perspective, then we can hold the paradox. Then we can see, okay, it's a paradox, but it is. Both is. So it's not that our victimhood is made wrong, or that we come to see that it never was. We come to see that it was on this level, and that it never was on this level. And that both can exist at the same time when there is this veil of forgetting, when there is this illusion of separation, of that, and this illusion of the identification with my story. Within this experience, there was the full experience of being a victim or of being a perpetrator. And when you were the perpetrator and you wake up to it and you feel really, horrible about it, and some people, they don't need to wake up to it, they immediately feel horrible about it. But some people, they've done such, the veil is thicker, and kind of like the veil is thicker, and they went deeper into forgetting, and they did things that is much more difficult, that they don't know how to forgive themselves, and so it remains within the unconscious much longer, maybe for a whole lifetime, and it takes another lifetime to revisit and to pick up that karma and to resolve that karma. Yeah. So it's only through the illusion, like we're standing in the middle of it. That's only how we can realize that the illusion is real. And that's the thing. You see? That's the thing. It's like only when we're asleep to the illusion do we take the illusion as reality. When we wake up to the illusion, should I explain this? Then it is the illusion that is reality. So let's put it this. Let me see if this works. So we see a Fata Morgana in the desert. So we see an oasis in the desert, yeah? When we are under the influence of the illusion, then we believe that there is actually an oasis there. When we wake up to the illusion, we still see the oasis, but we know it's an illusion. That's the difference. We know it's an optical illusion. Maybe that's not such a good. So, to heal, we have to go through. That's what I mean. We have to feel the pain. We cannot avoid the pain. We cannot avoid feeling what we could not feel. In order to heal, we have to go into that pain and feel it. However, when we know that feeling it is healing it, it's like then we can be open to it. And I want to say it gets easier every time, and it does, with this perspective, with this understanding of a deeper truth, a more expanded perspective. It does. But that doesn't mean that there won't be those moments and there won't be those windows of time where you go so deep into it that you are lost in the illusion, that it takes you over again, and that you feel it again. And I always say it's enough when there's a tiny, tiny little speck of light that stays awake. One little pixel in the whole thing that is light, that knows the truth, that stays awake, that knows, oh, this is good, what is happening, this is the healing actually. And 99% is suffering. And that's enough to not be in the re-traumatizing cycle. However, even the re-traumatizing cycle, there's never anything that happens in vain. That's the thing. Even when that's the perspective. Suffering is never in vain. So even when you suffer and you fall completely back asleep, but at some point you will come back. You will in hindsight realize that, oh, even there when I forgot again, I still picked up a little piece of myself again. I still, and the closer we get, of course, to the core, the more intense it gets, and has again this power to make us fall asleep, and to cast a spell. It's like casting the spell of illusion of falling asleep. It's like that, falling asleep to awareness and to the story where something terrible happens to me and I'm the victim, and there is a truth in that. But you want to come into the healing, you want to come into the salvation, and for that you have to move beyond. But the way to move beyond is to move through, is to really, really hold and be able to hold in your heart all the pain that you felt, or that you weren't able to feel. That was, that made you go completely unconscious, in shock, that you weren't able to feel. You have to pick that back up. And that's where, if you're open to that, it can come to you in a more gentle way. It can come to you quicker. It can come to you and you can move through it quicker. And if you fall asleep again to it, happens to me all the time actually, but I have to say I can fall asleep again to it, and I'm sometimes surprised that it still happens. You know, after all I've picked up and gone through, it still happens. And it surprises me. However, what I do also notice is that it has less and less to stand on. So it has less and less grip on me. So even if it grips me and it's like really, really strong, it can't hold on very long. It can't hold on very long. I always come back out the other side. And that seems to happen quicker every time. But funny wise, it can still be that I fall into it and my whole world is like I fall into a different dimension, and my whole world, everything that I understand about life is like I can't see it at that moment. I can't see it. It's gone, and it's like, oh, I am doomed. You know, I am doomed. I'm in that perspective. Like, wow, you know, I'm never gonna get out of this. This is never going to stop. But I always do get out of it, and I always do get out of it faster. And then I always understand also. Then I can always understand why I had to fall that deep again, because falling that deep into darkness and pain, you pick up the pieces of yourself, the fragmented pieces of yourself. You that's how you heal. So it doesn't matter that you will for a certain amount of time keep falling into forgetting, having windows of forgetting this, who you are, and the truth of why things are happening, and that you will suffer again. But as you come out of it, you pull all that suffering up into the light. You release it. You are your savior. That is the salvation of that part of you that was lost in the dark and in the forgetting of who you are, and in the illusion of being cut off from God and from life. And I cannot say that I'm 100% already like looking forward to the next fall, to the next dive. I call it dive. It's not a feeling yet. It's still mental, like I know. But I'm getting very close. I can sense that's shifting, and that's why I talk about 51%. I think as a 51%, you're really at that place where you say, I'm looking forward to the next dive, because you're getting like something positive out of the negative. It's like, oh, I get to save another part of myself. And then it must happen, like once it's 51%, the scales are tipped into this positive outlook, into your 51% of you is living in the truth and not anymore in the unconscious. I believe as of that moment, the healing goes boom, 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 boom. It's like a whole other experience of it. Yeah. It's like then you cry and you feel it. It's amazing. You can. I've tasted this. You feel the sadness, and at the same time, you are not sad. You are not in despair. You can feel those, like the energy and the emotions of despair, but you are not in despair because you do not forget anymore who you are. You do not forget the truth of life and who you are anymore. You know why this is happening. You know what's going on. You are healing yourself. You are picking up these parts, and as you are picking them up, the healing is the transformation of them. They go through your system. They go through you into the light, and they are released. And so you can then, have all the reactions of despair, but you're not believing in the story of despair anymore at the same time. At the same time as you understand and have full compassion for the story of despair, and know that it was there, that it had a reality, because it was justified. The proof was everywhere, for your despair and for your being a victim. The proof was everywhere. But now you see the truth of it, of why all of this, why the proof was there, why you had to go through it for such a long time. And you wake up more and more and more to your soul. And every time it happens, we get closer to this tipping point of 51%. Now, for me, it's been going on for a very, 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 very long time. And what just recently came to me is that it is possible. There is that depth, that the feeling of guilt can be carried on. Feeling of guilt, or in my case, or also karma, and the feeling also of pain, of having a horrible, some kind of a deep traumatic experience, can be carried on into the soul. So that even when the body is given up by the soul, and the soul is in its fourth dimensional specific code of dialing into wherever the souls go, I don't know, but it's somewhere in the fourth dimension, and bound to the planet. That of course depends on the soul's level of consciousness, where it goes. Not all souls remain, but I'm talking about the souls now that have been recycling, that have been reincarnating on Earth for a long time. This is what I'm talking about right now, because there's many souls of much higher consciousness, especially now as the planet has passed the zenith and is ascending. We have a lot more souls now on the planet that have a much higher vibrating, or that come, consciousness, that come from much higher consciousness, but that are incarnated into the body. And this is what made Jesus Christ so special, is because at his time, possibly he was the only one that was at the time on the planet with such a high consciousness, incarnate in a body. And somehow, I'm not going to go into it because I don't know enough about it. I've just heard about it and it made click, because that explains a lot about the story. Somehow, through his coming into such density, from being such a high consciousness, such a high dimensional consciousness being, already having a Christed Merkaba, coming into this density, somehow it shifted it opened up doorways, it unlocked doorways, it shifted the global collective consciousness and made an opening of consciousness available that wasn't available before, because he brought that into the collective field. And that's why they say he died for your sins. That's, you know, I mean, you have to see that the story is told it's been distorted a lot, and also in the translations, and it's being used to it's being used to control. But you know the way that it is being told, it is not being told from the consciousness of Jesus, where he was coming from, because he wanted to free as many souls as possible. He wanted to give that opportunity for people to wake up to who they really are. And of course, the ruling elite and the dark forces that were 2,000 years ago, very, very much here, just as much as they are now. Maybe now they're even more. But I don't know about that, but I do know that the dark forces have been ruling for the last at least 13,000 years. They have been on the up, and first now, after we have passed the zenith of our solar system, traversing this farthest away from the light point, going back into the light on this orbital spiral, on this spiraling orbit that it is on, our solar system. The dark forces have been on the upside. So let's say 51%, and I don't know, but they had the majority, or not in body count, but in like control. And they set up the system so that it would be easier and easier and easier, because they are in body count much less, to control us, so that we control each other. You know, that's the only way they can do it, because that's how they get their energy. You know. And somehow, through Jesus coming, he opened a door of consciousness, that possibility to awaken, you know, that wasn't there before. As I said, I don't know enough about it. This is just like hinting on something, but it'll come. It'll come, and I find that very fascinating. Because it's kind of like, oh, the story is true. It's just there is a distortion in it that makes a world of a difference. Yeah, and it's beautiful how all these, you know, how we are waking up to the clarity and to the truth of the story. Okay. So, but why I needed to make this video is that it is so important that every single thing we felt, we acknowledge that was our truth, and we have to feel it as our truth. We really have to, you know, embrace that part of us, and yeah, that felt so terrible, that was the victim. And only through acknowledging that was a truth do we come into the higher perspective, the higher truth, that was an illusion. And that only seems paradoxical, but it's not. It's like, it's paradoxical, God, but it's how it is. Both, you know, it's both. Yeah. It's not, I wasn't the victim, it's, I was, and I'm not. Or I was, and this part of me wasn't. And of course, these parts are never separate, but if that's the experience, that's the experience. And both can stand next to each other. And then we start to live in this, we start to live from our higher truth, and then our human side wakes up to this higher truth, and then it dissolves that illusory separation between us and our soul, and then all the collective, that's the greater and greater and greater souls, because it's all one soul. It's just that the consciousness it doesn't have the access yet, to all of it, so that we can have this experience, so that we the soul can have this experience. Yeah, yeah. And this allows for the soul, this waking up to the soul, when we live more from here and dissolve this, and then this realizes, oh, it's one body. It's one body. It's just going like this. We're not really separate. We're one body. Look at this. We're one, We're not two. It only seems that way. This is actually kind of a cool, these two think they're separate, but they're not. Yeah. Yeah, and then what happens is we don't regurgitate that story anymore from this perspective, because it's done. We've remembered it. We've remembered it from the tip of the greatest horror of it. We feel that all the way back. Every part of it. We remembered. And then this doesn't have to be remembered anymore. It doesn't drive you anymore. It's not a magnet that pulls you always back and recreates a scenario that will trigger these emotions within you. It's done. You move on. But for having had this experience, what this does is that the soul has been able to go into that density. The soul has gone forth into the densest part of the third dimension, like as close as it can go before it tips over into the fallen, Merkaba. That's kind of like the courage of the soul. Is like, how deep can it go? How deep can it embody? How deep can it embody? And then what happens is, in awakening, the light, this is another part of the story, which is also the reason why it happens and what is so beautiful. And this is something I learned just yesterday from Nassim Haramein. But that instantly makes sense. Is that, and actually it was like what I learned was more like a resonance and confirmation of what I got intuitively before. And that is, if we heal a part of ourselves that was fragmented from a certain situation at a certain point in time, and if it's a certain point in time in our past, it was also a certain point in space, and that's literal time-space point, where your body, your heart, was in the time-space continuum vantage point. In the time-space continuum, it's actually a point in space that still exists, and it exists somewhere very, very far away, because the Earth, the Earth moves through space, spirals through space, spirals around the sun, follows the sun's orbit, spiraling around through space. It's like this, So, let's say we're here, and this is when it happened. And there's an exact coordinate. And as our bodies, as they are moving through space, we leave behind a record, a sound, codes. All of our emotions are imprinted in space. Now, if I'm right here right now, and I've healed either to whichever degree I've healed it, as I said with the iceberg, bit by bit by bit, and at some point it's all gone. But it can take, for big traumas, it can take, as I said, it can take many years, it can even take lifetimes. But now these things happen very, very quickly, because that's the other story, that because we can't take them with us into these high vibrations, and as this light and these high vibrations are on the whole planet, it's raising up, it's triggering all of our all of our subconscious fears, wounds, traumas, shadow, however you want to call it, it's being triggered a lot, all the time, yeah? And it doesn't even take that much anymore. That's the thing. It doesn't even, it doesn't even take like this huge thing around us to trigger it. Or it could, but it doesn't need to. Depending on how far you got, it's already a subtle little trigger, can trigger huge, yeah? So, to the degree that you are healing now and here, this part of yourself, guess what? Guess what? You are connected. This is the line. This is your wake. Yeah, this tail of imprint since the time that you were conceived. Basically, since the time that your soul entered the fetus. Yeah. Yeah. That's when you. And then the interesting thing is, if you go further back, you go into your ancestry line. Yeah, that's the DNA, right? And the DNA, as we are moving through space, interestingly, by the way the DNA is woven, I can show you pictures of this. The way the DNA is woven is it's in exactly the same way as the planets also spin. The solar system moves through space. It moves like this, and every single planet in its wake, and every single light quantum soul on or in the planet also leaves this imprint in its wake. And these imprint, it's kind of like a light tail, codes that it leaves. It's emotional. It's the thoughts and beliefs, the emotions, the perspective you have. It's all that you leave, that you imprint and record. It goes, whatever you healed and set free and solved. It's like a dissolve, yeah? It's from the contraction, from the illusion, it completely opens up again to the neutral, to the way it was before the trauma happened. However, you are not. Once you're healed, you have evolved, because this whole experience made you evolve, because expansion is only and explosion is only possible through condensing, through contraction. Yeah. So now here's the fascinating part about it. Is that it unlocks, it saves everything all the way back to when it happened, to the event of trauma. And that gets cleared. So okay, let's say you have this imprint on space-time. And as we are moving through space, of course, we're also moving through all these imprints that were from whatever planets and beings that were moved there before, that crossed or moved there before. So we are moving also through these imprints, and they have, of course, an effect on us. So if we move through a dark place in space, we're also at some point a planet was where wars were happening or so forth, and we move through that. We can feel that. Just like we can feel if we go to a place, to the physical place on the planet where a war happened, doesn't matter how long ago, or where something terrible happened, it doesn't matter how long ago, but that wasn't released in time, whatever's left, we can feel that. And even people that are not necessarily, like you would say, super spiritual people, like I've heard, people sleeping in places, and there's this place in Hawaii where someone slept, and he said that he couldn't, he just, it was phenomenal. He could not sleep there, and and then he found out that he was sleeping in a place where there was this and he didn't see it at night. He didn't see the sign that says there was this huge fight or war happening on this plain, on this grass, and he was terrified, and he had to leave. And then he saw, or I don't know, I don't remember, but then he saw that there was this, here the famous battle so and so took place. Okay, so it's like imprinted, even though at the time that the battle happened, of course, it was in a completely different time-space vector. But still, it's imprinted still even on the platform of where it happened on the planet. So it's both, both at the same time. So when you do this healing, and this is something I got quite I don't know, a year ago or so, I realized this, that when we do healings, it like for example, one of my greatest traumas that happened exactly in a certain place on this planet, and I got that if I healed that trauma, that place where there are other people living there now, that place would be also lit up, made lighter. It would be those energies that are still stuck there will be released, because I had a dream of that place, and it from when I lived there, it was kind of dark, of course, also with my memory, but still it was a dense place, and it was a very gray place. And then I had a dream about 2 years ago or so from this place, and it had changed, and it felt sweet, and it was like the same place in a different dimension, like colorful. They had painted it, they had made gardens, and it was the same place, but it was like not huge difference, but it was huge, but already like some small little details that had changed, and it felt so much lighter. And then I got, at a certain point, I got that if I heal that part in me that was imprinted and that was traumatized at that place on the earth, that place right now would also feel much better, because that imprint would be healed and released. And so the people living there would be affected also, which is so beautiful and so powerful. And of course, also the vector space-time where it happened, in the middle of space. And so when another planet, because we will never come around that exact same point again, because it always goes in spirals, never in an elliptical circle on the same level. It always goes, spirals. There's always a flow of direction, but what can happen is that another planet will hit that place, and again, it won't be negatively. It's released.